Good morning. You did it right this time. I'm pausing for a little bit because I spent my entire presidency in little bitty boxes on a computer. And this is the first time I get to greet all you lovely faces in person. So I'm a little overwhelmed. If you could only feel my heartbeat right now. Welcome home, my fellow alumni and family. I want to thank you for joining us on this very unique reunion assembly. For a moment, if you don't mind indulging me, I'd like us to take a quick and quiet, well, not quick, but a quiet reflection and remembrance of Elizabeth McCormick. She's a trustee on the College Hill for nearly half of her life, beginning in 1975 for Kirkland College, and then in 1978 for Hamilton until her death in 2020. So it's an honor for me to posthumously give her the 2021 bell ringer, and so I'm going to ring the bell in her memory, and then I'm going to ask that you join me in a quick moment of silence. Thank you. Our next order of business, we're going to turn it over to the class of 72 for their half-century analyst letter, and then in rare fashion, they are going, so let's rewind. I'm sharing a number of firsts with you. Normally it's one person to present the analyst letter, so saying they is already a historical thing. But their format will be unique, so I'm going to ask that you all bear with this. I am proud, well, actually, proud's not the right word, because I know these two personally. And so unlike yesterday when I could, barely pronounce his name in appropriate fashion, these two have been in my life in ways that I can't describe and have always had great things to say, have been great role models for me, have been the most prolific and profound speakers when they need to be, and funny when they don't need to be. So it is my humble honor to introduce you to J.K. Hage and John Hysell. Please join me on the stage to do your analyst letter.
Josie, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I feel the same about you. Welcome, President Whitman, classmates, alumni, friends, family, faculty members, one and all. Come Saturday morning is what the Sandpipers sang when Pookie was waiting for the bus that would take her away to college in the opening scene of The Sterile Cuckoo. Well, here it is, Saturday morning. I hope you like college, her father said, played by actor Austin Green, in addressing Liza Minnelli. And then he just walked away. She wasn't the only one left mystified by the prospect of going off to school. There were two other guys.
Really embarrassing. Who were we, John?
Well, that's me, a well-groomed high school senior from Northern Highlands High School in Allendale, New Jersey, who transformed himself into a shaggy-haired, cigarette-smoking college senior looking for divine inspiration at a Fangitos party.
And that's me, hair neatly parted in a coat and tie at Notre Dame High School. However, 4 years later, I was wearing a dashiki while making a political statement about getting hosed by President Nixon.
And that's what Hamilton and the Age of Aquarius did to us. When we arrived in the late summer of 1968, though, the war in Vietnam was embroiling the nation. We were reeling from the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, and Richard Nixon was poised to defeat Hubert Humphrey in the presidential election. The #1 song in America was "People Got to Be Free" by the Rascals, and Alan J. Pakula was filming The Sterile Cuckoo on campus.
When we graduated, the war was finally beginning to wind down. The Equal Rights Amendment had just been passed by Congress, and the White House plumbers were about to break in to the offices of the Democratic National Committee, the consequences of which led to the book All the President's Men, later converted to a movie by Alan J. Pakula.
And in between, well, major shit happened.
That's a technical term.
Suffice it to say, the sound of B-52 bombers flying over the campus from Griffiths Air Force Base, a mere 10 miles away, was the overture for a cacophony of protests and riots and tribulations. Little wonder our generation wrapped themselves in the blanket of Woodstock, just like the couple on the iconic concert album cover. Oh, by the way, they've been married for over 50 years, as have Ken and Cindy Gottry from the class of 1972. Ken married his junior year in high school, sweetheart Cindy Moses right after sophomore year, and they just celebrated their 52nd anniversary, and they're here today. So
On our bucolic hill in Clinton, we reflected on the changes that were going on at the time. And while we may have looked young and foolish, we did feel a responsibility for what was happening in the world and to the earth. And after 4 years, we were poised to go out and change things with the ideas and the ideals that Hamilton and Kirkland had given us.
we had to decide which road to take when we got to the bottom of College Hill. And I guess you could say I took a right in 233 and went way past the Music Museum in Deansboro. To New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Andover Newton Theological School, Wyoming, West Virginia, Minneapolis twice, Princeton, and Florida. All along the way, I built homes and I practiced the culinary arts, started a family, became an international sales executive for Cargill, married my wife, Britt. And in an effort to express my gratitude, I came back to Hamilton to really try to raise money for education, which I feel is critically important, and it was an effort to give back. And I closed out my career as vice president for advancement at SUNY Geneseo. And one of our 3 children, Julia Ruther, 04, is a testimony to the Kirkland women. She's a Hamilton College graduate.
I too became a pilgrim. Hage, in fact, in Arabic means pilgrim. I studied overseas at Oxford University and at the University of Madrid, worked in Washington, D.C. for Ralph Nader, and then moved to Albany to work in the New York State Legislature while studying at Albany Law School. After becoming a lawyer, I spent 7 years in Alaska, only to return to my hometown of Utica, where I followed in my dad's footsteps, trying to make the world better through the practice of law and the pursuit of justice. I'm proud to say that I founded a publicly traded company that helped usher in the wireless telecommunications industry. I'm even prouder to say, though, that my wife, Hetty, an indomitable force. Believe me. I mean, I used to be 6 feet tall. Raised 3 wonderful children, all of whom now are lawyers, 2 of whom attended Hamilton, and 1 of whom, Gabriel, a member of the bicentennial class, works with me at Hage and Hage.
So as sojourners, we found paradise right back where we started. JK and I are deeply honored and humbled that we were chosen to represent our class today. We would also like to acknowledge friend and classmate Steve Wulf, who helped us craft this 2-man presentation, the first in-class analyst letter tradition that began in 1865. Thanks to the input of classmates, this is truly a team effort reliant on their recollections, their insights, gleaned from a survey we sent out over the winter, the booklet we put together for our 25th reunion, and when our memories were a bit sharper, and conversations with old friends.
We'd like to express our gratitude as well to classmate Glenn Doc Reisman for keeping us all connected over all these years. We're sorry that Doc couldn't be here today, but his presence is always felt. And we need to thank someone else who's not here, the late Rob Ziegler, for many of the photographs that you'll be seeing during this presentation. Because of Rob's work in our 1972 yearbook, his genius will remain with us.
And thanks to Sharon Rippey and Stacy Himmelberger and Victoria Kidd and all the wonderful staff members who made this weekend possible. I think they deserve a round of applause. Archivist Jeremy Katz also proved instrumental with our research for the class of 1972. So I now ask our illustrious 1972 cohort to stand as one and be recognized. You may applause, or if you wish, snap your fingers. Gentlemen, please rise. So, who were we? Well, that's the basic question asked of every analyst. And on May 27th of 1972, the year most of us graduated, Albert Ross Eckler had the honor of speaking for the class of 1922. And he was uniquely qualified to answer that question because he has recently served as the director for the United States Census Bureau. Chubby, as he was called at Hamilton, was a 1918 graduate of Richfield Springs High School who played football before graduating as salutatorian and getting his master's and doctorate degrees at Harvard in economics. From there, he went on to government service for the Works Progress Administration, and that led him to the Census Bureau. If 1922 seems a long time ago, what Dr. Eckler had to say remains with us. It's ça plus ça change, la plus ça même chose. His freshman class arrived shortly before the outbreak of a flu pandemic that took the life of one student and confined many other to the infirmary at the Sigma Phi House. Because a war was raging in Europe, the entering class of 132, which was then a record high, found itself reduced to 68 in the start of their sophomore year because so many men left to join the Student Army Training Corps. And Warren G. Harding, a Republican of dubious morals, had just been elected president. And there were other strains of the letter that ring familiar today. The charlatans were big. So was hazing. So was alcohol, surprise. Hockey game against Army was a big deal, and Dr. Eckler spoke of the scientific and cultural opportunities on the Hill. And indeed, the balance between the arts and sciences has always been at the heart of Hamilton education. But when Chubby reflected upon the wisdom of his professors, he also let it slip that they went by the names of Stink, Pills, Bugs, Snipes, Flatfoot, Rocks, Smut, and Baldy. Times do change, though. Dr. Eckler mentions that tuition was raised during his time in Hamilton to $120 a year. And as for the board at Commons, that jumped to $6.50 a week. This may come as a shock to the class of 2022, but when we entered Hamilton as a class of 258 men in the fall of 1968, also a record high, the tuition was $1,700 a year. All but 10 of us were white, and 220 came from the Northeast, 161 from New York State alone. But most of us were raised by parents shaped by the Depression and World War II, who hoped that we would fulfill an upwardly mobile dream they had for us. I've always found it remarkable, largely unconsidered at the time, that how a decision I made when I was a mere 17-year-old would be so profound in how it shaped my life. And fortunately, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. We all came to the Hill with sky-high hopes, repressed doubts, vivid dreams, and unwarranted confidence from being among the top students in our high school and prep school classes. At first, Hamilton did nothing to discourage that. As Mike Stone recalled in the booklet for our 25th reunion, Dean Hadley Depew told us at our freshman orientation in the chapel, look in front of you, look behind you, look to your left, look to your right. One of you may become a U.S. Senator. If you happen to be sitting next to Tom Vilsack, the former two-time governor of Iowa and current Secretary of Agriculture, Stretch was close to prophetic. But then came the rude awakening, of course. The faculty wasn't as impressed with our intellectual mettle as we were. And those A's and B's we were used to seeing occasionally became C's and D's now. The madhouse that was Dunham, where most of the freshmen were housed, put us in mind of Newgate, if you had read Great Expectations. And whose idea was it to put 200 plus 18-year-olds in cinder block suites of immaturity, 200 yards from the pub, which opened its doors every night at 8:30, and had 25-cent Utica Club on tap, a jukebox at the other end, and a cigarette machine as the fulcrum. The superb fall weather quickly turned to snow. And on Halloween of our freshman year, as Dr. Alan Nichols recalled, the drifts in the Dunham Horseshoe became so deep that many of us jumped from the third-floor windows into those drifts repeatedly. We soon discovered that the sport of cafeteria tray sledding down the hill was great fun. But then the late Mike Hirsch lost many of his teeth while seeking that thrill and bouncing off a tree. As Tom Broderick suggests, the volume and duration of snow actually deepened our attachment to Hamilton and each other. Dave Spootley Ellis actually gave lectures about historic New York State blizzards. Just so you know, the largest snowfall in the last 100 years was the winter of 1970-71 in Oneida County, 186.5 inches. The third largest was the winter of 1971-72. Once we got the hang of the all-nighters and found a cozy carol in the James Library, we began to really appreciate the rigors of the Hamilton curriculum. We also thanked our lucky stars for having Kirkland's first year coincide with ours. Granted, the ratio of men to women on the Hill at the time was 8-1, but the willingness of men in tweed jackets to break tradition and the courage of women across the street to take a chance changed Hamilton for better and forever. As history professor Digger Graves said in his farewell lecture in May of 1969, when I came to the Hill to teach in 1927, there were no campus streetlights. Now there are many, and the more Kirkland women we have, the more lights we'll have. Who among us can say we literally brought illumination to our campus? Kirkland's faculty members were generally younger and more informal and put a premium on dialogue. By the time we graduated, the ratio of men to women was approximately 3 to 2, and we could sense the impending demise of the fraternities, which had 70% of us in their thrall. Even as a loyal SIG, I knew that the time would come to end that system of social segregation sooner rather than later. We've benefited as well from the 1968 arrival of John Wesley Chandler as president of the college. He was both socially conscious and protective of his students during those years fraught with worry. In coordination with Kirkland's president, Sam Babbitt, he implemented a 414 system and introduced it our sophomore year. Trustee Richard Cooper, class of 44, once said, tongue-in-cheek, he was concerned for President Chandler. The students liked him. The faculty liked him. The trustees liked him. The alumni liked him. So Chandler lived by a credo he expressed in a 2002 remembrance entitled, "A Little College is a Dangerous Thing." Quote, "I believe that the institutions of this society have the resilience and the capacity for self-renewal to respond to the demands made upon them, and that a new order of justice can be achieved," unquote. We sincerely hope his words remain true. If Hamilton did have a guardian angel, it was Dean Winton Tolles. Who looked a bit like Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life. Tolles graduated from school from Hamilton in 1928, but he was young at heart and deeply concerned for us. And as the story goes, apocryphal or not, he refused to inform the Selective Service if one of his students had dropped out or failed out, even though he was obligated to do so. In the middle of his senior year, our classmate Josh Simpson went to Tolles with a seemingly outrageous idea of spending January in northern Vermont learning how to blow glass. Tolles approved. And upon graduation, Josh started a glass-blowing studio with Matt Foley. 50 years later, we will soon receive the fruits of Josh's genius and generosity in our hands. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Winton. Pat Cardinal became a dentist and a football referee, also told this wonderful story that says a lot about Dean Tolles and the valiant efforts of Hamilton athletes, for that matter. In the last football game of my senior year, we defeated Union for our first win of the season. I'll always remember this, looking up into the crowd and seeing Dean Tolles with a big smile on his face and a small flask in his hand. He was our most loyal spectator, regardless of the score or the weather. We all have those kaleidoscopic visions floating in our minds, and Dr. Bill Nassif remembers coming across handwritten letters from T.S. Eliot and alumnus Ezra Pound while he was moving contents from the rare book room in the old library to the new. Mike Scarpito, who became a high school superintendent, can flash back to the Hamilton-Kirkland mixer the second night as a freshman. 150 men, 3 women. Ken Judson, an attorney and elite marathoner, recalled his introduction to the real world immediately after our commencement in the Sage Rink. He started his new job in the school maintenance staff, and by picking up and stacking folding chairs, one of which he had just occupied. Judge Ed Crummick can still see the army of dogs who roam freely on the campus, but especially Sid Werner's Cocker Spaniel, who would pick a different student to follow around each day. And as Ed noted, probably to report back to Sid later that night. Scott Bellarmine is still trying to wash the sludge and mud off from the epic mudslide in front of Dunham in the spring of 1969. Dr. Stuart Young, a former Marine Corps helicopter pilot and race car driver, finally recalls Coach Greg Bott lending him equipment for those thrilling jungle hockey nights. I myself remember a gin and juice party on the SIG porch on Saturday morning of house parties our senior year. The Electric Elves were playing Beatle covers, and I saw Dean Depew pulling up in his car. And as social chairman, I became concerned. I walked down to greet the dean, and he said to us, "Would you mind toning it down, lest we disturb the parishioners down the hill?" As the social chairman, I met him and suggested that we too were glorifying God. and he bought it. Among those memories are our brushes with fame as well. Alex Haley was teaching on campus while preparing to publish his book, the seminal book, Roots, not to be confused with the comedy album of the same name that the staff of The Spectator put out. Among the notable and notorious who came to speak to us were Dick Gregory, Allen Ginsberg, Dr. Timothy Leary, and William Kunstler. A little later, J.K. will talk about the visit of Israeli diplomat Abba Eban our senior year. J.K.'s future employer, the author of Unsafe at Any Speed, Ralph Nader, felt that title in his bones when Jerry Ryan and Tom Vilsack picked him up at the Utica airport in Tom's VW Beetle. Jerry proceeded later on to try to pick up Miss Genesee. I'm not sure if Alan Stauber and his football teammates know this, but when Hamilton lost to Wesleyan 33-0 in the fall of our senior year, the freshman starting center for the Cardinals was none other than Bill Belichick. Just before the 1969 commencement, President Chandler got a call from Ezra Pound's publisher informing him that the 1906 graduate wanted to come back to campus. This man of words was silent for most of the weekend, except for when his host, Professor Austin Briggs, and his wife, Margaret, served him dinner at their home. And Margaret asked him what he would like, white meat or dark? And he said, dark. That's the painting of the poet done by our classmate, Robin Tabinko. It once hung in the library until it was decided that Pound's toxic political views overshadowed his contributions to 20th century literature. For a commencement, poet laureate James Dickey came to get a Doctor of Letters, read a few poems, and have another drink. At an ELS cocktail party, a student admitted to Dickey that he had not read his work, to which the author of the recently published Deliverance said, "Well, you have something to look forward to, don't you?" And little did we know in the Four Tops sang "I'll Be There" in the alumni gym during the 1969 Winter Carnival, they were actually referring to their visit to the Sayou House in about an hour. Jack Ducatli remembers seeing them in the Great Hall. The music of those years molded us. Truly, they were long-playing records. As Bob Hansman says, rock and roll was our life's soundtrack, brilliant and personal, cushioning the tumult with a backbeat. The live concerts at Hamilton and Kirkland also have stood the test of time, thanks in large part to the Student Entertainment Committee, which was chaired by Josh Simpson, who occasionally played his spoons with some of the acts. Besides the Four Tops, we had Marvin Gaye, Tom Rush, Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, Al Cooper, Sly, and the always late Family Stone, Jim Croce, the transcendent Laura Nyro, Sam and/or Dave, C-Train, Livingston Taylor, Shana Na, Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin, Freddie Hubbard, Dave Van Ronk, and yes, the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra. Time was so fluid that Don McLean performed at the Coffee House for a 75-cent admission charge in the fall of our junior year, just before he recorded American Pie, the #1 hit in the nation, that following winter of our senior year. And then there was the night that the yellow, mellow Youngbloods couldn't get to Clinton. Yes, so their concert promoters sent an entirely different act instead. We'll let the Spectator and someone named Thomas Wolfland Smith pick it up from here. Quote, "Necessity brought the mothers of invention. The freaks flipped out, the straights moved out, and the rest sat anxiously as Zappa and his group ambled up to their mountain of equipment amid billowing clouds of marijuana smoke." That's the contract signed by both Frank Zappa and Josh Simpson for $3,500. Zappa was something of an educator himself, and he is known to have said, "A mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it's not open." Well, it was Hamilton that pulled the ripcord for us. Steve Furr and Billy Hardy and Dana Carlson speak of having their minds expanded, coming to love learning for the sake of learning. Dr. Joe Markel, who came from Hong Kong and the rigid education system there, fell in love with the freedom he found to think originally and not have to be forced to regurgitate rote learning. The first of the list of our favorite professors unfurls like a scroll. Sid Mortimer, Bob Simon, Ruben Shalakian, Austin Briggs, Warren Wright, J.R. Mattingly, J. Gomer Williams, Martin Caravano, Fred Wagner, Dwight Lindley, and we could go on and on. Don Jones, who coached football and freshman basketball and golf, was, in the words of Kurt Zaranowski, cool in every sense of the word. Ron Roth remembers English professor Thomas McNaughton Johnston, who was his advisor for 4 years, as the kindest person I've ever known. Hamilton also encouraged us to move freely from the sciences, be it physics, geology, chemistry, or Ross Eckler's field of economics, to courses in literature, history, philosophy, and the physical arts. Dr. Robin Detler, an infectious disease specialist in Atlanta, says the most valuable educational experience of his life came not from medical school, but rather from Edwin Barrett's Shakespeare class. He opened my eyes to the brilliance of Shakespeare's archetypical characters, his deft and timeless grasp of the complexities of people at different points in their lives, and the universal nature of many of our deepest conflicts and joys. Barrett, one of 2 professors on campus who wore a cape. Imagine that. German professor Thomas Colby was the other. We take a group of students to London every January to attend plays over there. Award-winning playwright and classmate Richard Nelson wrote a wonderful play based on the class, Some Americans Abroad. As for myself, I'll never forget the Gnostics chorus from that eccentric but brilliant John Robert Mattingly. Often at his home from Thursday night to midnight, and thanks to those evenings, I came to believe, as Plato's student Aristotle posited in Rhetoric, the goal of liberal arts is enjoyment. Looking back at the pictures of the boys who came to Hamilton in '68, comparing them to the young men who left the Hill in '72, is amusing. But it's also amusing to note something I found in my admissions file, the folder with a handwritten note from Sid Bennett after my interview. John will surprise many if he does the work. I guess I did, but I'm as surprised as any of you that I'm standing up here to represent the class of 1972. Thank you very much.
"20 years after we graduated, one of our English professors delivered the annalist letter for the class of 1942. He was Dwight Lindley, known to his friends as Newt and to some of us as the Smiling Screw. He was chair of the English department while we were at Hamilton, and someone from whom you wanted to learn expository writing as long as you didn't care about your grade. He began his talk with a stanza from a poem written by one of his own Hamilton classmates, a man named Tom Pryor. The poem went like this: "A candle in one's heart. Look in a moment's silence at our home these several years, this hill above the world. Time spent becomes a candle in one's heart. The flame, remembering what is good, and what has fled. What made those lines especially poignant was that Tom Pryor had died in 1951 of malaria contracted while serving in North Africa during World War II. Professor Lindley himself was a master sergeant in the Combat Engineer Battalion in Europe during the war, and he married another sergeant, Jane Morrison of the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. Inspired by one of his English professors, our own George Nesbitt, Lindley came back to teach at Hamilton for 32 years while he and Jane raised their 3 children. Look in a moment's silence at our home. Quite frankly, I didn't know if somebody like me could find a home when I ascended the hill as a 17-year-old in September of '68. The outside world was smoldering in part because of the Six-Day War between Israel and its Arab neighbors in June of '67, and my family happened to be from Lebanon. So along with my dorm stuff, I was carrying a lot of anxiety. Would a Lebanese kid from Utica be welcomed or be ostracized? Would I be treated with disdain and suspicion? Would I make friends or would I be alone? John already has spoken of the zoo that was Dunham, which we called the Aaron Burr Lucky Shot Memorial Dormitory. But Dunham became kind of a refuge for me, offering ample opportunity for camaraderie and providing something of a trauma bond. And those beautiful red clay sidewalks we used to have took me into classrooms that expanded my mind. As it happens, my English 11 professor was George Nesbitt, the man who had inspired Dwight Lindley to become a teacher. I learned the Old Testament from J. Williams. A love of Spanish literature was instilled in me by Jeremy Medina. To this day, I still audit Professor Medina's courses. And the fact that I'm here today talking to you owes a great deal to what I learned from Warren Wright in speech. I also learned about chemistry the hard way. Stu Williams, now a doctor, one of my Dunham roommates, along with Michael White and David McCarthy, decided that he wanted to ferment some apple juice from the Clinton cider mill by putting a 25-gallon oak barrel he mounted on a sawhorse in the center room of our third-floor Dunham quad. Some of you may remember this. While we were away at class, thank God, the barrel exploded. It blew out all the windows down toward the parking lot in the back of Dunham, and it embedded oak shards inches into the concrete block walls. Our quad thus was rendered uninhabitable. And that persisted for the rest of our freshman year. The 4 of us were rendered instantly homeless. However, our parents were not amused, especially when the college split the cost of a complete renovation among our 4 families and added the bill to our tuition. Fortunately, the cider bomb incident did not disrupt the shooting of the Sterile Cuckoo. It was exciting to see Liza Minnelli around campus and remunerative for the students who received a small per diem for being extras in the film. But even after Alan Pakula's crew was gone, other movies were brought to us by our two film societies, Doc Reisman's Ammonich and Fred Keller's Kinokunstgesellschaft, introducing us both to the classics and the avant-garde and turning many of us into film buffs. As for live theater, I'm proud to say that I was a member of the Charlatans, a troupe of amazingly talented and incredibly hardworking people. Classmate Tom Creamer, who became the dramaturg for the esteemed Goodman Theater in Chicago, reports that in our 4 years, there were some 55 different theater events on campus, ranging from Shakespeare's Richard II, seen here, to Richard Nelson's The Dying Joke, in which classmate Jim Ragland played, rather convincingly, a Camus-quoting dog. According to Tom, one of the first of our class to shine was John Sims, who co-starred in Leroy Jones's Dutchman with Donna Sondheimer. I myself went to Chicago one January to study improv at Second City Theater with Sam Faison, Rhoda Bronston, and Alan Bryce. They would throw all kinds of outrageous situations at us. Too bad one of them wasn't, you have to stand up in front of your college classmates 50 years after you graduate. Then there was the epic balcony scene in Commons, and many of you were there, when freshmen rained food down onto the upperclassmen. That was the real deal. Indeed, the Hamilton social life really resembled one extended trailer of Animal House. Some Hamilton students somehow stole a 2,000-pound Revolutionary War cannon from the old Trinkus Manor restaurant in Oriskany. Another sacrilegious soul among us stole a gravestone from a cemetery and used it as a coffee table in his dorm room. And Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack might not want this known, Tom, but when he was a freshman, he and the other DU pledges stormed the steps of Delta Upsilon with water balloons to take over the House. Now he takes over federal agencies. There were rolls to the rock and to the boat and to the horseshoe, better known as the shoe. And back in those days, a student would announce that it was time to put down books and pick up a glass by removing his shoe and holding it up in the main reading room of the library. Nobody had to say a word. That was the Rock, also known as Pierce's Tavern. We were learning that there was a time to be serious and a time to have fun. And in a way, we were just trying to fulfill Hamilton's motto, know thyself. Helping us along that path of self-realization was Kirkland. In his 1992 annalist letter, Professor Lindley admitted, "I had believed that on the whole and for the future, the college should be kept for men. Turned out, I was and am wrong." Indeed, it can be argued today that Hamilton is really the child of both schools, which merged in July of '78. Back then, the people in suits sometimes needed convincing. Hamilton had been publishing a newspaper since 1847, but when it was decided in 1972 that Elizabeth Hysell should become the next and first female editor-in-chief of The Spectator, they stopped the presses. Before she could be confirmed, student body president Jerry Ryan, publications board chair Terry McCavery, and editor-in-chief at the time, Fred Axelrod, were required to travel to New York City to explain to Coleman Burke, longtime chair of the Board of Trustees, why Beth was the right person for the job. They did, and she was. She's paid a big price for that because she's been married to Ed Crummick since 1984. And Beth ultimately served on the boards of both Kirkland and Hamilton. These several years on this hill above the world. If we thought we had come to Hamilton to spend 4 idyllic years here, we found out soon enough that Hamilton could not escape what was going on out in the world. There was turmoil on 2 fronts, the struggle for racial equality and the resistance to an horrendous war. But while those 2 issues got our blood boiling, they did provide us with opportunities to learn about the world and about ourselves. Yes, it was the age of Aquarius, and it was also an age of enlightenment. On October 1 of our freshman year, the Black Union of Hamilton and Kirkland colleges was formed. In a letter to the community, printed on page 2 of the October 10th Spectator, the members wrote, "We feel that such a union is necessary to preserve the racial and cultural identity of Black students in our white-oriented environment." At the time, Alex Haley was the only Black professor on our campus. President Chandler knew the college had to do much more to encourage students of color to come to Clinton, and he actively recruited minority professors and helped provide the union with a house of its own. But it wasn't until the spring of 1970 that the community at large became aware of just how much work needed to be done. And this reckoning came at a contentious meeting of the Trustee Committee on Student Affairs, at which Black students said some faculty members seemed to have a racist attitude toward them. Among those students was our own Harry Winston Long, who thought that minority students were not getting the same opportunities as white students. We called him the Cat. A subsequent editorial in The Spectator had this to say: "Trustees, professors, and many students were appalled by the mere suggestion that faculty members practice racial discrimination in the classroom. Such a reaction is even more appalling. The administration cannot ignore these charges. Truth was spoken to power, and Hamilton changed for the better." We had on-campus protests against military recruiters, too. Some of you remember that fistfight on College Hill. But our treatment of the West Point hockey team, when it came to Sage Rink in February of '69, was shameful. Students spit on the Army skaters and threw dead fish at them. At one point, a pig's heart hit the Army goalie, spattering his jersey in blood. In a letter to the editor of The Spectator, hockey captain Peter Kennedy wrote, "I realize that the people responsible are but a minority, but it is the entire school that that's images destroyed. Little wonder that the Army hockey team ended its longtime rivalry with us and never have returned. Vietnam hovered over us like our fans did over West Point. Many of our students, including John Hysell, dropped everything to join the 500,000 protesters in the March on Washington in November of '69. On the night of December 1 of '69, we all remember that first draft lottery, and it was broadcast over WHCL. A low number meant you would likely be drafted if or when you lost your college deferment. And a high number meant you probably wouldn't have to go. I still remember my own number, 188. I got lucky. Classmates and future physicians, Dick Sturr and Stuart Young, not so much. They both got number 1. Helping us get through those rough times was classmate Matt McKenna, who kept office hours in the basement of Root Hall to advise students on the draft. Then came the horror of Kent State. All across the country, college students went on strike. Our students convened on the village green in Clinton to express their solidarity. President Chandler, who spoke there, said the demonstration had a quiet and prayerful quality. When the town, however, made it clear that it did not agree with the sentiments of the gown, students reached out to local civic and church groups to explain their views. The academic year was left in tatters. Many students chose to take advantage of a pass-fail option given to them and improve their Frisbee skills. But when school resumed in the late summer of '70, we remembered why we had come to Hamilton in the first place, helped along by the lyrics of Joni Mitchell's Woodstock. Well, maybe it was just the time of year, or maybe it's the time of man. I don't know who I am, but you know, life is for learning. Our nicknames for professors rivaled those of the class of 1922. Spoolie, Digger, Leif, Asian Ed, Sid the Squid, Yvonne the Terrible, Mumbles, and yes, the Smiling Screw. I mean, they were terms of endearment. Jerry Ryan fondly remembers government with Channing Bullfinch Richardson and Diplo with David Millar. After a stint in the Army, Mike Roden took the lessons he learned from rockheads David Hawley and Donald Potter and became a geology professor himself at the University of Georgia. Violinist Mike Gillette, one-time concertmaster of the Radio City Music Hall Orchestra, remembers Professor Bonta telling him that music was best learned in the context of a liberal arts education. Our valedictorian, Henry Suey, a computer scientist at NYU Medical Center, came to Clinton from Hong Kong, and he recalls how much the professors helped him adjust to his new world. Dr. Philip Pearl was the best teacher I ever had, said Henry. Patient, insightful, and eager to help. He made studying difficult subjects like quantum mechanics, relativity, and cosmology almost enjoyable. This letter to the class of '72 largely has been a tribute to teachers. So I'd like to acknowledge our many classmates who went into education: Peace Corps volunteers, English and French teachers, history and geology, biology, ministers, coaches, administrators, a headmaster, and even a college president. In the 25th reunion book, one high school history teacher wrote under college reflection, "One of my finest Hamilton moments occurred during the past 2 years when two of my Brookfield students were admitted to the college. These were the first two graduates of my high school who even applied to our college, and I am proud of both. They are Angela Whitford, 99, and Virginia Whitford, 2000, both a credit to Brookfield Central School and a current plus for the Hill. That teacher was Jack Henke, who taught history at Brookfield, the second smallest high school in the state of New York, for more than 30 years. As for the two sisters, Angela is now the CEO of Accelerated Learning Solutions in Florida, and her sister Virginia is the Vice President for Strategic Advancement of our own House of Good Shepherd in Utica, a wonderful institution that has helped neglected children for over 150 years. Ginny recently said, Mr. Henke was excited about every lesson, and that excitement expanded our world. I never left one of his classes unchanged or unchallenged. Jack's not here today, but we would like to acknowledge him and all the other educators in our class. Would you mind standing so that we can acknowledge you? Here's my favorite line of Tom Pryor's poem. Time spent becomes a candle in one's heart. There's so much to cherish about our time at Hamilton. The fall colors, the sight of the chapel in a snowfall, the blooms of spring. Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, I can hear it now, blasting out over the Carnegie Quad. Those weekly chapel meetings that brought us excitement for the days ahead. And the 11 o'clocks at ELS that helped us decompress and sort out what had happened that day. There was the thrill of victory, the 3-2 overtime win for Brian Moran and the Hamilton hockey team over Colgate, at Colgate, during our senior year, and then the state championship in the fall of '71 for Ken Judson and Mark Piron's Hamilton cross-country team. Then again, there was the agony of the basketball team's 1-15 record in '70-71 when Ronnie Roth played his heart out for first-year coach Tom Murphy, who certainly redeemed himself and ended up with 602 victories. If Fanguitos did not remind us of Woodstock, skinny dipping in the Kirkland Reservoir certainly did. The enduring beauty of Root Glen helped Ken and Cindy Gautry deepen their relationship before they raised two daughters, and he became a teacher, author, and computer consultant. As for me, one of my lasting memories was the night in September '71 when the eloquent Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban spoke in the gym. I sat quietly, listening to his talk, entitled Middle East, Past Agony and Future Hope. He was accompanied by a large security detail which had done its homework. So I found myself surreptitiously surrounded by men in suits who were watching me instead of him. I felt a little left out, especially when his optimistic lecture was met with great applause. He had not mentioned, however, the 1,300,000 Palestinian refugees who had been forced to leave their homes by the Israeli army. In the hours after his speech, I told my side of the story at 11 o'clocks in the pub. And what I discovered was that maybe after all, Hamilton was the right place for a Lebanese kid to go to college, because I thought people were listening a little bit to what I had to say. And a few days later, The Spectator allowed me to write a guest editorial to express my views. the flame remembering what is good and what has fled. Many of us still enjoy friendships made at Hamilton, which perdure to this day, undimmed by time, by distance, and indeed even by death. We're going to read the names of our brothers that we've lost.
Julian Bernstein,
Alan Blazak,
Stephen Burns,
Byron Cheeseborough,
Dennis Dempsey,
Frank Dickel,
Joseph Aloysius Egan,
Mike Flynn,
Charlie Fraser,
Frank Gardner,
Ralph Gigliello,
Harvey Goldstein,
George Gray,
Mike Hirsch,
Brian Kirkpatrick,
Harry Winston Long,
Dave McCarthy,
Billy Mile,
Michael Malawa,
Billy Osterman,
Charlie Rader,
Michael White.
Rob Ziegler. That's Rob with the camera.
Well, I think we've answered the question we first posed here. Who were we? Time now for the follow-up question. Who are we now? In honor of Dr. Eckler, we now number 210 of the original 258 of us. And we live in 7 different countries, 36 different states. 52 of us, though, live here in the Empire State. In the years between then and now, we've made the world a better place in really a staggering variety of ways, working with our hands, with our minds, with our voices, with our hearts. A high percentage of us, over 80% in the last 5 years, have given to the college. And 18 of us have sent children to Hamilton. I am one of those. There are 5 of us that have 2 legacies: myself, Paul Bott, Jim Bianco, Richard Lisman, and Rosie Rosenbaum. Hopefully, we will see the day when our grandchildren pack to come to Hamilton. But to get an even better sense of who we are and to channel Professor Lindley, let's go back to our own commencement, May 10th, 1972. Poet James Dickey managed to sober up in time to read several of his works. One of them was In the Treehouse at Night, and the entire poem is worth the read, but here's a little snippet of it. We lie here like angels in bodies, my brothers and I, one dead, the other asleep from too much hard living. In midair, huddled beside me. Dark climbed to us, up here as we climbed up the nails I have hammered all day through the sprained comic rungs of the ladder of broom handles, crate slats, and laths. Foot by foot up the trunk to the branches where we came out at last over lakes of leaves, of fields disencumbered of earth. I want to thank you, our teachers, our brothers and sisters, for helping us climb to this home in the trees. Thank you for lighting a candle which burns still in our hearts to remind us of what is good and what has fled. I love this place. We love this place together, and that's the key to it. We are this place, and I promise you never again will I leave a barrel filled with cider in a dorm room.
Step. All righty, so I don't know how you follow that, but next up, Paddy Mcguire, if you don't mind joining me on the stage. All right, so I have a whole script that I'm supposed to say, but now I don't want to. So Paddy was my predecessor, and when the nod came to nominate me as vice chair, I was a little scared because I didn't know what that meant. But Paddy's graciousness and guidance and friendship and humor and just overall awesomeness prepared me in ways I didn't know that I needed. So thank you, Paddy, from the bottom of my heart for being an awesome predecessor and showing me the way. Can I say something? Hold on. So I have tokens of appreciation because we don't always do a good job of telling our volunteers we love them before they leave. So I wanted to make sure that he gets his flowers now and that you all get to celebrate him to say thank you for what he did previously before I stepped on the plate. Speaking of sports references, thank you for being a pitch hitter because I'm going to put you to work.
Okay.
So before we put him to work, we got to go.
Okay.
We got to do the whole photo. So
Just tell me where to start.
Josh Simpson creates these awesome globes. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Josh Simpson creates these awesome globes, and we usually give them out as tokens of appreciation for when people do awesome things for the college, and there is no greater person who deserves this than Paddy, so please join me. Tons of other gifts.
Which includes,
It's the sports reference.
Know thyself.
Right. And then, now we have to give out college keys,
I wanna
and I
say
want
something.
him to open this in private because I have a message in it and I don't want to cry. So,
I just want to say something about being a volunteer at Hamilton College. 30 years ago, maybe, Dean Abalon called me one day and said, "Can you help the college?" And I said, yes. And every time somebody asked me, could I help the college, I said yes. And I'll keep saying yes, because I love this place, and it did more for me, a kid from public school in Juneau, Alaska, who arrived here so unprepared for the world I was about to be a part of, that this college took a chance on me, and I will always say yes as long as I'm alive. So thank you for everything. Okay, what am I doing? Okay.
all right, so now we have to give out college keys, and I have to get the list of names. And it is not in order anymore, so whoops. All right, so first up, Nancy Avery DeVoe, Kirkland 74. Parent 2004. And Isabel Nielsen, Kirkland 76, for their 2021 creation of the publication Lost Orchard 2. Thank you so much. And then Edwige Jean-Francois, class of 1990, who did an awesome job on the Hamilton issue, the special issue for diversity, equity, and inclusion that was sent out to you guys last year. Edwige, are you here? And then Brian, I can't pronounce his last name, but he's not here, so we're skipping it, sorry. Moving on. All right, Sharon Rippey, parent 2012. Clap really loud. And Dick Tantillo for creating the Boxes of Love in 2020 for more than 50 international students who were unable to return home because of COVID. And John Murphy, class of '85, for creating a crowdsourced version of Charissima during the pandemic and then sending it around to encourage us in 2020. It's absolutely awesome. Thank you so much, you guys, for your wonderful participation and volunteerism. You deserve your college keys.